Welcome to the Industrial Talk Podcast with Scott McKenzie. Scott is a passionate industry professional dedicated to transferring cutting-edge, industry-focused innovations and trends while highlighting the men and women who keep the world moving. So put on your hard hat, grab your work boots, and let's go.
All right, that is right. You're saying to yourself, Scott, where am I? You're on the Industrial Talk Podcast. This is a platform that celebrates you. You're an industry hero. You are bold, you are brave, you dare greatly, you innovate like nobody's business, you're solving problems, right? And you're changing people's lives, and you're changing the world each and every day. That, my friends, is why we celebrate you each and every day on this particular podcast. All right, in the old Industrial Talk hot seat, we've got a gentleman by the name of Mathew Sachs. Right? Please make a note of that. He's got a long title, SVP, Strategies and Business Development. The company is called CPower Energy Management. We're going to be talking about distributed energy and much, much more. Let's get a crackin'. All right. A favorite food of mine, chips and salsa. I was just sort of chewing on some chips and salsa, and you're saying to yourself, Scott, hey, your body's a temple. Now when it comes to chips and salsa, my gosh, that is absolutely delicious. All right, let's talk about some events that are coming up that you have must put on your calendar. The first one is the Digital Summit, and that Digital Summit is brought to you by those incredible folks at IoT Solutions World Congress. It is the 11th and 12th of May, and you know what it does? It's featuring real professionals solving real problems and leveraging innovation and technology to make that happen. Yeah, you can use that. Put it on a bumper sticker. I have no problem with that. But the real kicker is that, you know, my background's utilities. So we've got a side event. So you go over there and you say, all right, let's see what's happening. So you scroll on down, side event, and at 9 a.m. Central Standard Time, we've got the, I'm leading a panel of great people, Electric Utility Digital Transformation Journey. So how do you take all this wonderful digital transformation, innovation stuff and apply it to that grid, apply it to utilities and beyond, so that when you walk into a room, you flip a light, it works? Yeah, that's what we're all about. And the panel, if you click on in there, it's pretty cool. So it features a gentleman by the name of Phil Carey. He is a consultant with mad skills, former employee of Southern California Edison, and he was leading the way. And the other gentleman, Michael Bates, he's the GM Energy with Intel. And we're talking, once again, this electric utility digital transformation journey. Go out to IoT Solutions World Congress. That's their URL. Find the Digital Summit, sign up, and learn something about how these leaders are moving forward with incredible solutions. All right, the other event that I'm going to be at. I'm going to actually be in Cleveland for this particular event. It's the Manufacturing and Technology Show. And it's far off, so you've got a lot of time to plan for this bad boy. November 9th through the 11th, and then they have a virtual event December 7th and 8th this year. And again, you know, we're starting to sort of build on it, but I'm going to be broadcasting live from that particular venue and highlighting, once again, incredible people who are, well, leaders, innovators, trailblazers, second to none, making our lives better. Yeah. Manufacturing and Technology Show. And the URL is mfgtechshow.com. I'll have it out on Industrial Talk. You'll be able to see it. You'll be able to find it. There's no excuse for you not going. That's it. That's all I want to say about that. Now, let's get on with this particular interview. As you all know, I geek out on this utility stuff. I don't know what the future holds, but it's exciting. There's some cool stuff happening. And people like Mathew Sachs and others are just coming up with incredible solutions that are pushing the boundaries of utilities. But once again, utilities want that stable power, and they've got to work with a number of entities. It's a challenging time, an incredible opportunity for brilliant people like Matthew, brilliant people like Phil, brilliant people like Michael to be able to just shine and really solve problems. All right, distributed energy is really the topics, but once again, we cover pretty much everything. So enjoy the interview. Matthew, welcome to the Industrial Talk Podcast. I'm excited for this conversation. Listeners, we're going to be talking a lot about, I don't know, man, a lot of future thinking, a lot of future conversation. We're going to be talking about distributed energy. Outside of the fact that is hard to say quickly, but distributed energy. How you doing, Matthew?
I'm doing good, Scott. Thanks for having me. Appreciate you taking the time out today to talk.
You, man. It's cool. It's cool. All right, for the listeners out there, give us a little, background, a little 411 on who Matthew is.
Yeah, sure. I've been in and around the energy space, or what I would call the new energy space, for the last 15 years. And when I say new energy, it typically means things like solar storage, things like that, and really building and investing in new companies. Today, I lead strategy and business development for CPower, and really all that business mumbo jumbo. In short, I'm helping find new ways to leverage our expertise and capabilities to grow and help evolve the grid we live in. Should mention, my previous experience spans from utilities to private equity and building some solar companies up from the ground.
Mad street cred. If you go out to his stat card out on LinkedIn, type in Matthew with one T. Don't come to me and say, I can't find him because you're spelling it with two T's. One T, Sachs, pronounced as Sachs. So go out there. You'll see a stat card. It is impressive. CPower. What is that? Does that mean anything, CPower, or is it just a name?
CPower is just a name. We were built up over time through a bunch of mergers and acquisitions. Some of them started with a C, so I assumed this is all before my time here, but I assume that's where the C moniker came from. But I still think it rings well.
It does. It does. Now, let me ask you this. Let's talk a little bit about distributed energy. Now, I've had a number of conversations with other utilities and other energy professionals, and one of the real challenges, of course, is how do you manage, how do you create that nimble, that resilient, that to incentivize generation that is renewable onto a grid, into a community, and maintain that stability of that system. So with that, distributive energy, give us a little definition of that.
Yeah, well, distributed energy is, maybe going backwards a second. Traditional energy is generated in a centralized form, or it's in big power plants that are typically far away from the demand, and then they're transported through big transmission lines into distribution lines into your home and your business. Distributed energy is where you move this generation or other DERs, distributed energy resources, into that distribution grid, often what we would call behind the meter or into your home or business. And that's where things like rooftop solar or storage come in mind. And it is a challenge, what you mentioned. I think there's a lot of challenge in kind of orchestrating all these little devices to kind of play the symphony, if we could stick with that musical analogy for a while. But it's a challenge that us at CPower and others try to help keep up with. In the end, there's one thing that has to happen, and supply has to match demand on the grid, or the lights go out and no one's very happy.
Yeah, don't do that. Everybody's in for renewable, and rightly so. It's all good, and whatever that portfolio mix looks like. But if my power starts to flicker, and then I go to my digital clock on my microwave and it's blinking at me,
it's no good.
I'm not happy.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about where this is going. Why is this important? It just seems like there's a lot of traction that has happened, a lot of things that are taking place. Why is this important?
Yeah, I think there's a ton of reasons why it's important. One, and maybe at the top, both businesses and homes are adopting these DERs, distributed energy resources, on their own for all sorts of reasons. Some because they want to be greener or cleaner, some because they want more backup, some because it offers better economic incentives for them in terms of bill savings, or what we do at CPower to help balance the grid with this. But they're already using them. If you have these things being deployed in mass already, why not use them to help balance the grid instead of going out and deploying, say, another central station power plant that might be a lot dirtier, but even maybe more important, it only operates for a few hours a year when the demand is highest. So the idea is to leverage these assets to kind of, well, a term we're all become very familiar with over the last year, flatten the curve, but flatten that demand curve in this case, and alleviate that generation.
Let me ask you this. The challenge I see is that you brought up this sort of centralized generation. Long ago, it was relatively easy to match supply and demand because you had these centralized assets, big centralized generation assets. The design was to be able to ensure the customer, the end user, the manufacturer, the customers at one end receive consistent, reliable power. Now, with a distributive energy model, you take that centralized and they play a less and less role, but you're trying to create a baseload type of scenario for all of these disconnected or these smaller generations. How do you do that?
Yeah, well, I think that's a great point. Many of these DERs that are out there are not meant to be baseload. There are some that are like a CHP type of plant, but for the most part, they're meant to, well, from a grid perspective, they're meant to alleviate the peak. So things like storage, energy storage in your home or in your business, they're not for the grid. They'll never be a baseload asset. What they could do is when you have your hottest day of the summer and everyone's using your AC and the grid at peak demand, instead of building that next new generator, you just start discharging your batteries, these batteries in your home, which looks like to the grid less demand. You know, an analogy I kind of use sometimes is July 4th, right? By me, July 4th has a lot of traffic. If you said, let's get rid of all July 4th traffic, we had to do that, which is the case with the grid. It has to stay balanced. You said, let's get rid of all this traffic on July 4th. There's a couple of ways you could go about this. You could build a bigger highway, right? Very akin to transmission and generation. You could go, let's say, I'm going to take this 3-lane highway and make it a 50-lane highway, and you're never going to have any traffic on July 4th. The problem is you're going to eat into all this land. It's going to be a little dirtier. Most of all, it's going to be empty for most of the year. So what we kind of do at CPower is, and what you could do with distributed energy is kind of akin to that, in the sense that you say, let's not build a 50-lane highway. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Let's pay people to leave a little earlier on July 4th, or maybe leave a little later, or maybe not leave at all. But that way, you don't need that big highway, yet you still get rid of the traffic. Hopefully that made a little sense.
Yeah, I'm all on it. Absolutely. There's a way of being able to manage, and correct me if I'm wrong, Matthew, that demand side. There's things that can be done on the demand side of that equation. Like there's probably assets or buildings or whatever might be out there that can be controlled and managed in a way that benefits the demand of that profile. Is there a way of being able to take sort of these distributive energy blocks and aggregate them in such a way to create maybe a larger aggregation? Is there some way to be able to do that?
Yeah, absolutely. First, you're definitely right. It's not just batteries here we're talking about. Buildings could be batteries in themselves. Like take the HVAC, you could cool them off earlier, and kind of akin to leaving earlier in my traffic example. But yes, I mean, what CPower really specializes is I would say aggregate and go one step further and optimize those assets. We stand between C&I customers, like large, big box players, heavy industry, universities, hospitals, pretty much all types of large C&I customers. When I say C&I mean commercial and industrial.
Yep.
And the grid. And the products that we offer to the grid is really aggregations of this. So it no longer looks like a small little one-stop shop for the grid. It now looks big. In fact, across the country, we have about 4.2 gigawatts under management, which is the size of several very large power plants.
So 4.2 gigs. That is. It's bigger than a megawatt.
Yeah, it's considerably bigger than a megawatt. But
yeah, absolutely. And so now you're able to take that and aggregate it. And from the perspective of, let's say, managing the grid, you can control that in such a way that, and like I said, I'm just sort of spitballing here. You can control it in such a way that will benefit that grid in a positive way to match supply and demand. And because it's distributed, maybe some part of that capacity doesn't need to be activated in southern. You have that capability of doing that?
Yeah, that's exactly what we do. And it's often what we would call capacity or power, which is measured in megawatts. But it also goes into things like ancillary services, like the frequency. When you plug in everything's at 60 hertz or your computer doesn't work right, sometimes these could be used to do things like that as well.
So it supports that too as well, because it's what was this? Somebody was saying something about the generation of the past would ensure the quality of the cycles and the voltage and everything that you want. But the demand today is so important because we're dealing with such, our technology is sensitive. It doesn't do well when it's like 59 and a half. Doesn't like that because everything is designed. So you're able to do that, be able to aggregate that, and be able to do it relatively easy?
I don't know if it's easy. And it's something to keep in mind that you have to do this with not interrupting our customer's core business. So if you have something like a battery or a microgrid, that's easy because it's a device that just dispatches, and the only thing you'd see is a green light versus a red light, so to speak. But other customers could drop load on only the hottest day. They'll maybe move their temperature up or pre-cool their store. And those customers aren't going to be working for a frequency program that happens many more times a day. But so I think, it's first you have to really understand what each facility's kind of potential is. Sometimes we call it the watt potential. But then you have to figure out the right software to kind of orchestrate that back to the grid. And then you still have to win these grid programs. Some are open programs where you could bid in like an auction. Some are highly negotiated bilateral types of deals.
Man, that's a dynamic system. That's dynamic. That's a lot of decisions going on. Do you guys work closely with the utilities?
Yeah, we have a business that really focuses on winning those utility deals, and even utilities themselves. Some have more open programs where you could bid in, and others are we like to say are closed, but you have to bid to win that program, like an RFP type of system.
Right.
But yeah, we work very closely with them, and what we find they often value is the insight we have into our customers and what they could do. That's where because you could imagine if we're in region, let's say on the Northeast, and then we have a similar set of customers on the Northwest, we understand how much load and how dependable and how accurate, because from a utilities perspective, dependability is everything. You might get there sometimes, that doesn't count for them. You got to get there all the times, because we'll go back to the first thing. You're not happy if you walk in and see your oven light flickering.
And that's a lot of pressure on you guys because utilities, they've been around for a long time. They use a lot of that technology. The way they operate their systems been around for a long time, since the beginning of power. And they've just, the system has evolved into what it is today. However, they can always go back to, okay, nope, this is not working. Our customers being impacted. We're going to pull back and we're going to do whatever is necessary. So that's a lot of pressure on you guys.
It's definitely some pressure, and we got to get it right. When you're in the energy business, there's not a lot of room to get it wrong, and there's big problems if you do. But it's also a growing problem for utilities and grid operators alike, in the sense that we talked a little bit about renewables earlier, and we have these low cost renewables that are clean and generally great getting deployed in mass right now. But if there is a downside of this, they're different than the traditional generation. They're intermittent. In other words, when the sun goes behind the cloud, solar panels produce less electricity. So now you have this growing need of where they used to have this, what we would call firm production. Now you have this intermittent production. And we could go back to that kind of highway example. We could build this redundant generation system to pick up, or we could have demand react a little bit more to supply, which obviously we're big fans of here. And help do.
That's a digitization. That's an innovative solution to that, because you're talking old school thinking. And I remember going to the system operator, or whatever they called it at that time, many years ago, where the guy would just sit there. It's still very manual. I see my demand going up. I could sit there and turn my generation. I can meet it. And then if there's a huge peak, then I just turn on a turbine. A GE turbine, and start popping and getting that demand, or getting that supply up to meet the demand. But here, I mean, it's a lot of little things. That's a dynamic system, and I don't know if, and correct me if I'm wrong, Matthew. It has to be done through technology. I don't think the human side could manage it that way.
Yeah, it depends on how big and small your pixels are. Like when our industry started, it was about summer peaks and eliminating summer, and you'd have some very big loads, and it used to be done with phone calls. Hey, call up XYZ company, tell them to drop their load and go through their curtailment plan. And we still do a bit of that, but for the most part, it's gravitating all the way to much more automated, to the case where a fair amount of our portfolio is now all machine to machine. People don't get involved. But you're spot on, Scott.
What are the roadblocks? I mean, it's going to happen. Let's put it is happening now. It's going to be more and more. There's a lot of other dynamic challenges existing within the utility space beyond what you guys are doing, but it's all very dynamic. What are the roadblocks? What are we talking about here?
Yeah, it's a fair point. And maybe I should preface everything saying is, I don't ever envision us moving to a fully distributed system. There will be central station generation, and there will always be a need for that. But roadblocks for us is in part regulatory. We have the regulators for utilities and the ISOs. It's still called the ISO, or ISOs.
ISOs, yeah, ISO, independent system operators.
Yep, they're there, and their job isn't to experiment with new technologies, right? Let's just be frank. Their job is to ensure reliability of the grid and ensure the right economics and the fair economics. So they're not really incentivized to push new rules out in front of the technology. So I kind of sometimes liken that to a capacitor. You have everything getting shoved in there and built up, and then it just unloads. We just had one unloading at FERC, which is the
Federal
regulates our transmission.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
But they came out with something called FERC 2222, but it basically says that ISOs and RTOs need to reward or compensate distributed energy devices in the same way that central jet is.
See, I'm going to push back a little bit. Here's the deal. I'm an ISO. Or RTO or whatever. I get paid, or I'll get penalized. I'm okay over here if I deliver my power in the right way. If I don't, I get penalized. So I'm not, and yet there seems to be a disconnect between the incentives to try to incentivize businesses to that distributive, renewable, whatever it might be over here, and yet these over here are saying, no, I tried that one time. I got penalized, and everybody hates me because of that. And the customers are coming at you. So there's a real disconnect that happens there.
I think that's a fair point. And, you need to get it right to start with. Like, it can't be, this is, forget about your oven and my light. this is people's hospital, their oxygen, the other things that are in life. These things need to work, and there's critical loads out there that have to work no matter what, more than 5.9 accuracy. But it has been proven to work over time. But this is kind of the issue. We were talking about the challenges. When is it the right time for that capacitor to load, and how far do these technologies have to develop, and then how far can you develop them without kind of mass deploying them? And I think where the rubber kind of meets the road here is another kind of important thing to consider is economics. And people can't pay up to kazoo for their electricity either. It's probably the one of the quicker ways to create unhappiness is to basic necessities, or increase the cost of basic necessities, which I think electricity is. So I think it's here. And the funny thing is all this, one of the big reasons that you see DERs being deployed, we talked about it just really briefly, is resiliency. We've seen our grids fail us over the last year, right? California, Texas. Yep. And what does that do? That drives more people to go out and get types of backups, batteries, backup gen, just a gen set, microgrids. And that's, as those are deployed, you're just increasing the opportunity to be able to use those for other reasons at a low cost, because now you're not trying to incentivize their deployment. You're purely tapping into something that's already there.
Okay, so let's put your future hat on real quick. Where do you see it going? What do you think is going to happen in the future?
Yeah, that's let's quickly refresh on where we came from. It was really a supply-driven network is what we've been talking about. In other words, if I flip my light switch on here in New York, somewhere there's generation clicking on to supply the electrons. So oversimplified example, granted, but it is. That's the way it works.
It's a real-time commodity. Boom, boom, boom.
And that's where we were coming from. And now where we're going to is you're seeing these distributed assets being called on to supply things more and more. And that's been growing. And that's bringing us to what I would call a two-way or a bi-directional grid. And we're seeing that happen more and more. And I think that's kind of where at the beginning stages of that right now. And as we do this, companies like us are investing in what we call optimization technologies to improve this greater and greater. But we're also getting more and more data, and you're also getting more and more decentralized devices out there. So where does this all wind up? I don't know, but sometimes I like to think it will be like the internet, and gravitate to what I would call an omnidirectional network. So in the internet, we all consume information. We read emails, web pages. We all produce information.
Some more than others.
Emails, for sure.
Don't send me an email.
You should see more. You should see some of the emails I get. I wonder how people consume or produce such large information. And then you also store information, whether in the cloud or locally, right? And then if I sent you an email today, Scott, it might route through Kansas, and tomorrow it might route through Milwaukee. But the network's always adjusting. So as we have more and more of these nodes and these distributed devices out there, and better logic, does our electric grid eventually become omnidirectional like that? And
it's interesting.
Yeah. We're far away from that now.
You're the SVP of strategy and business development. That means you have this conversation quite a bit. Because I'll tell you, that's cool stuff.
I get paid to dream sometimes, and that's the best part of my job.
But I'm telling you right now, it's important. You're constantly educating, you're constantly collaborating and innovating. That's what makes this time really interesting from my perspective. I don't know what switch clicked, but all of a sudden everything is possible. Everybody's saying, why not? Well, I'm going to do it. And then the technology is sort of there to be able to do it. And it's just an interesting time. And I wish I was younger, because I think that, the future's bright from that perspective.
I think so too. And in fairness, the grid hasn't changed much since Sam Insull, a guy 100 and something years ago, kind of founded it. So we're overdue for some innovation here. We've changed how we do everything else. So, but it's a super exciting time, and mostly because I think we can make a difference with what we do, make people's lives better, and hopefully more affordable.
That's key, and you will. It'll happen, or it stops cold in a sense. It doesn't continue to move forward. It doesn't. If you don't have the right things in place to make it and to facilitate this new innovation, then yeah, it's tough to keep on, doing that. But I think you guys are there and you understand what the drivers are. And as a consumer, I just want flip on my lights. It's on. It doesn't fluctuate. I'm happy as a clam. That's the simple reality that I live under.
That's right. And, one of my mentors once told me a good analogy, or it was with solar, but he said, Matthew, people don't go solar to save money. And he said, they'll go solar to be green. They'll go to be tech forward. They'll go to, they'll go for many other reasons, for some resilient power on their house. However, you need to save the money, because if you don't save the money, they'll be embarrassed when they tell their friends. And that's so wise. Like, and that's true.
That's true.
And but none of these solutions work if they're not economic. And
yeah, you're spot on. All right, how do people get a hold of you? They might have said, "Gosh darn it, that Mathew with 1 T is amazing. I want to get a hold of him."
Well, I guess the best way, hit me up on LinkedIn, or I try my best to get in touch with folks, or I'd read out my email here, but it's quite long. So you might do better on LinkedIn. But don't forget the 1 T.
That's exactly right. MathewSachs is his last name. Sachs is how you spell it. Yeah, reach out. Let me see. Apparently there are other Mathew Sachs out there.
Well, I'll be the one with CPower with a comic
put a little comment in there. CPower, you're good. Yeah. All right. Hey, you were wonderful. I'm telling you, man, future's in good hands with people like you and CPower and others. I like it.
I had a good time, Scott. This is great.
Fun. Yeah, cool stuff. All right, listeners, we're going to wrap it up on the other side. So fear not, we're going to be able to provide, once again, how to get a hold of Mathew, the wonderful people at CPower. And, thank you for joining.
You're listening to the Industrial Talk Podcast Network.
All right. Thank you very much, Mathew Sachs. Thank you very much. Please note, it's only 1 T in Mathew, and Sachs is SACHS. Look at his stat card. Reach out there on LinkedIn. You will not, and I'm telling you, you will not be disappointed. Reminder. Put this on your calendar. May 11th through the 12th, Digital Summit, brought to you by those incredible people at IoT Solutions World Congress. They're passionate about really leveraging innovation and technology to solve problems. And everybody that's in that particular digital summit, powerhouses, I'm just saying. And then the other one, of course, is the Manufacturing and Technology Show, November 9th through the 11th, 2021. Make a note. It's all out there at industrialtalk.com. All right. Once again, hang out with people who are bold, brave, and daring greatly, and you're going to change the world. Like all of these people that are at these conferences. Thank you. Thank you for joining and supporting the Industrial Talk. We're going to have a great conversation shortly.